Hello, it's Crine here with the patch 1.04.1 changes and analysis, which is a patch mostly focused on buffing some weaker options. Without wasting time, let's start with the weapon changes. The laser blade is perhaps one of the most underwhelming melee weapons, with an uncharged attack that has a very narrow hurt box and very poor vertical tracking, plus no stagger on hit, so it is difficult to hit a moving target with its uncharged attack. And even when you do hit, there is no stagger for follow-ups. Its charge attack is very wide, but it doesn't have much horizontal momentum, and its vertical tracking isn't that great. Thus, it is a horrible weapon when chasing enemies, but it does alright thanks to its wide radius against enemies charging you. Its slow animation also doesn't make for a great weapon punish on a swap, especially when other melee weapons can punish for even more damage. Therefore, buffing this weapon certainly makes sense. However, I don't think the way they buffed this weapon is a great choice, because they simply made it cheaper to use with more cooling so you can use it more often. The fundamental flaws of the weapon still remain the same as I explained. I wouldn't mind if they completely revert these changes to give the laser blade a better and faster normal attack. Next, the Moonlight's charge attack power and cooling are increased. First of all, Moonlight has a very similar brother, the Redshift, that has very similar stats and identical costs. But if I had to make a tier list that only considered performance, the Redshift was at least 2 tiers higher than the Moonlight before the buff. Their difference was that the Moonlight had higher charge attack values, but lower regular attack values versus the Redshift. However, I don't think many people took the coral damage of the Redshift into consideration. Moonlight deals energy damage, which is reduced by the target's energy defense, but Redshift ignores damage reduction from defense. This means that before the buff, against enemies with around 1200 defense, the old Moonlight's charge attack is actually about as high as the Redshift's. If the target has even more defense, the Moonlight can actually deal less damage, despite having a higher charged attack. Therefore, the buff to charge attack is totally warranted to make the stronger charged attack stand out, even against tankier targets. And in addition to this, they also made the Moonlight's cooling higher than the Redshift's, which means that you can spam this more often. However, I do think that the Redshift is still a tier higher than the Moonlight, because you're more likely to use the blade's regular attack, and you don't really spam this straight off cooldown most of the time anyway, especially because it locks you into place. Next, they also buffed all of the bomb launchers, which are definitely all underperforming. The jamming bomb launcher got a buff to its charge attack, which takes 0.4 seconds instead of 0.8 seconds to cast. This is quite useful, because the charge attack explodes the smoke bomb right in front of you, so you can use it even without a surface. This allows builds that use jamming launchers that don't stick to the ground a much easier time using this weapon. The Napalm bomb launcher got the same charge time decrease. The charged attack spreads out its 3 projectiles, more than the uncharged version. Its damage also got a very slight increase, and it got more overall ammunition. To be honest, these aren't the worst weapons in the world, and one of the few options for area control. The burn status effect reduces the enemy's stagger resistance, so you can more easily stagger them with your impact damage. And if the enemy remains in your flaming field, they take a lot of damage. The Therapist got an even bigger buff than the Napalm bomb launcher, but this buff is not nearly enough to save the weapon from being bad. It is still extraordinarily difficult to apply the shock status effect with this weapon, so I honestly expected a status effect boost. However, all that was changed was that the shock damage was stabilized. It didn't build up that much electrify status to begin with, so this change didn't do much. I would like to see a buff to its electrify buildup so that this weapon can actually get used. The Werger's charge attack got a massive 24.7% increase, and it also has faster cooling. I did think that this energy shotgun had a very nice niche, but its power was a bit underwhelming because its uncharged attack isn't great due to its very widespread. 24.7% is a huge increase though, especially because the weapon can be buffed further by energy specialization. The charged attack of this weapon is now very deadly at close range combat, and also very good when used as a punishing tool on staggered targets, thanks to the raw amount of damage it deals and how fast it charges up. You can literally start charging the weapon after the stagger and still make it in time. Probably the biggest winner of the patch note. The KRSV got a change. I can't really say it's a buff because it depends on the type of attack you usually use with the KRSV. Its ammo count is doubled, but its ammo cost for both stages of the charge attack are also doubled. Therefore, you are only getting more ammo when you do regular shots. This is a great change because the KRSV used to have one of the lowest total non-charge damage out of all the energy weapons. Having this number doubled makes its uncharged attack better. Its ammunition cost is reduced from 600 to 400, which is where the problem comes in. This only reduces your ammunition cost if you do uncharged attacks. Charging the KRSV will actually make it costlier post-patch. Whatever the case is, this weapon still remains one of the most expensive weapons to use in PvE missions, and is difficult to S-rank with due to its burdensome cost. But I guess they're pushing for you to use the uncharged attack more in PvE. The Morley's had its weight reduced and got 5 extra rounds of ammunition. Some people might argue that the Morley didn't need a buff, but I am here to tell you that this change really isn't over the top. The Morley's used to cost more weight and energy load than the Earshot, and I don't think this should be the case. It is difficult to land all hits of your Morley's unless you are very close, and when hitting a target near the ground, the Earshot's 90 radius actually gives it a wider area than the Morley covers for its chip damage. You also receive the full damage of the Earshot as long as the AoE hits. Therefore, I think it is perfectly fine that the Morley receives this weight reduction. Both the 3-cell and 6-cell plasma missile launchers got a buff. These are great when the enemy stays within the AoE long enough, so they are good against slower enemies. But the missiles also don't land well against aerial targets. Because they mostly do chip damage and not their full damage in PvP, I think this is a fair buff, but the vertical plasma is still going to be better in most cases. Now, onto the frame pieces, where a lot of the changes are for the arms, specifically melee specialization. This is definitely an attempt to diversify the melee arm choices, or allow heavier arms to also carry melee weapons without getting punished as hard. While the latter might be true, the former is difficult because even after the buff, the Basho arms are still leading by a wide margin for a heavily melee-focused build while being stat dense. It is nice to see some of the weaker arms get a cost reduction as well. And finally, they're also making the higher-end target tracking options a bit more varied and slightly cheaper to get. This is a perfect time to make some last-minute adjustments to arms before I do the arms breakdown. I'll get into more details for the specific breakdown, but overall, I do like the changes. Besides the arms, some legs also got a buff. The Mine Alpha had its AP increased and energy load reduced. This is a great change because the Mine Alpha was one of the weakest and most awkward legs, as I've explained in my legs video. These things just kinda sucked because of their crappy total weight. You usually end up running one of these legs only when you can't change one of your other pieces and still have extra weight to spare while remaining mid-weight. However, if that's the case, the HAL legs were much more likely to meet the condition, and you're barely losing any defensive stats. With the new change now, the additional defensive stat trade-off for its cost definitely makes much more sense. All the reverse joints also got a buff. The Cassoir had its weight reduced, making it much less awkward of a leg for a lightweight build closer to 62.5k weight. However, its load limit is still the lowest, and I would honestly take the Noctirihers over the Cassoirs for most scenarios. The Mind Beta had its weight reduced by 1k and obtained 50 extra points in stability. This is an excellent change that further solidifies its position as the mid-weight reverse joint pick near 75k weight. A buff to stability, which is a reverse joint's greatest problem, is also more than welcome and differentiates it from the Spring Chicken, which had its AP and defense buffed. The Spring Chicken also has its load limit increased, which really allows you to run a heavier reverse joint build, which is what the leg was used for. I really like how these two reverse joints are handled, because it gives them a bigger differentiation while buffing what each leg is supposed to be good at. And that's all for this time. Like and subscribe. If you want to support my work, please consider buying my fantasy novel or donating to my Patreon down below. With a book purchase, you can also request a topic from me. Krite, signing out.